And so with module 19, okay, the second part, we're going to start to get into some terminology in terms of reinforcement and punishment. And we'll talk a little about those schedules of reinforcement and punishment if we have enough time. Okay, if we don't, again, I'll record that for you guys, make sure that you're all set. But now we're going to get into the specifics of how this operant conditioning occurs. Now, the first piece that we're going to talk about here is this idea of reinforcement. Okay, so we're going to talk about reinforcement and punishment as two separate things. Let's start with focusing on reinforcement. And again, I'll caution you guys that this is one of those sections of the class where we're going to use some specific terminology, and you're going to have to kind of spend some time practicing with it, thinking about it. I will post a study guide on Carmen related to reinforcement and punishment to help you out with this. But again, it's something you have to spend some time with. Okay? Now, when we talk about reinforcement, we're talking about feedback from the environment that makes the behavior more likely to be done again. Okay, so we kind of talked about this a bit before already. But again, we're talking about here, we're going to reward someone for doing something well. Okay? We want that behavior to happen again. Okay? Now, when we talk about reinforcement, we can talk about it as both positive and negative reinforcement. Okay? So positive reinforcement is the reward is adding something desirable. Okay, so in this case, it means that you're going to add something that the creature wants, that the person wants, in order to increase the likelihood of that behavior happening again. So examples of this are getting that paycheck at the end of the week. That's a positive reinforcement. You're adding something desirable. You're adding getting money as a way to reinforce the fact that you came to work and you did your job. Okay? A child gets an A on a paper, and you give them some type of reward. And maybe they get ice cream or a movie or something like that. That's, again, another example of a positive reinforcement. You're adding something desirable in order to then increase the likelihood of that behavior happening again. Okay? Now, to help you understand positive, we'll get into negative reinforcement. Okay? So negative reinforcement is the reward is ending something unpleasant. Okay? So negative reinforcement, in this case, the reinforcement here is ending something that's unpleasant. And there's all kinds of examples of this. I'm going to ask you guys in just a moment to generate positive and negative reinforcement examples. Almost all of you, I'm guessing, woke up this morning to an alarm. An alarm is an example of negative reinforcement. The reason why this is the case is it's ending something unpleasant. So it's ending that awful noise that you hear when your alarm goes off. I don't know if there's any alarm that ever sounds all that good. And so you're ending that unpleasant noise by reinforcing the behavior of waking up. Okay, so we want to wake up. Okay? And so in order to help us with that, what we're going to do is we're going to end something unpleasant. We're going to end that aversive noise. Okay? Seat belts also do this. So you might get a pinging noise. A light might flash on the dash if your seat belt's not buckled. They're going to reinforce the behavior of putting your seat belt on, okay, by ending something unpleasant in terms of getting that beeping sound to go away. Okay, similar kind of car reference. If your brakes are squeaking, okay, that means that your brakes are unsafe. So they put squeakers in or squealers in so that you hear that sound. And it's an unpleasant sound. You don't want to hear it. So they're going to reinforce your behavior of getting your brakes changed, okay, by ending that unpleasant sound. Okay, so a lot of this is kind of tied to sound things, but we can talk about as kind of other examples as well, is that if someone starts to do something they're supposed to, okay, they're going to end something unpleasant in terms of kind of these probationary periods. Okay, so you might start a new job. They might say, well, hey, you can only get rewards once you've shown that you've done something well. So we're going to end the unpleasantness of being kind of locked out of things once you've done the behaviors you're supposed to. So what I want us to do with reinforcement, okay, is I want you guys to go ahead and through chat, generate examples of both positive and negative reinforcement. Okay, so identify which type of reinforcement it is, okay, and then give me an example of it. Okay, and I'll kind of walk through some of these examples with you guys, kind of highlighting where we've got it. Maybe if we kind of miss one here and there, kind of help with that as well. Okay, so I'll give you guys a minute through chat, come up with examples of positive, negative reinforcement. Again, this is the way to practice with this particular lesson, with this terminology. So I'll give you guys a little bit to work your way through it. All right, let's get a whole bunch of examples, guys. All right, guys. These are great responses. I see a few more coming in. So I think you guys have a great handle on the positive reinforcement. Again, getting something more desirable to occur by reinforcing it, giving something more. So giving a dog a treat for being good, absolutely. You're reinforcing the behavior of the dog behaving well by giving the dog the treat. Um, the idea of there's a really good one in here. You know, getting a paycheck at the end of the week, getting a tax refund for filing your taxes. So reinforcing that you filed your taxes, you get a refund potentially because of that. Encouragement after doing something well. So again, that's a positive thing that we want. We're adding something desirable because we want that behavior to continue going on. There's one I was looking for here specifically. All right, so I'm not finding it, but there's a good one. And the negative reinforcement, we had some good examples here. Okay, so the idea is we're going to end something that's unpleasant. So, you might reinforce the behavior of taking a shower by ending something unpleasant of smelling bad or people commenting on you smelling bad. So that was a good example. Let's see what else you have. Someone being let out of timeout. So ending something unpleasant for showing that they've kind of changed their behaviors, that a child's going to behave better, is another example of kind of that negative reinforcement. So you guys, I think, have the right idea, but it's kind of something to make sure that you're keep practicing. I think there's a good one here, negative reinforcement, taking medicine to make a headache go away. So you're trying to take care of yourself. You want to reinforce taking care of yourself. You're going to do this by ending something unpleasant. So to end the unpleasantness of your headache, you're going to do something to take care of yourself. Take a moment to make sure that you're okay. So I think you guys have a good idea here. Okay. Let me talk about another example here, kind of work through another example here. Okay. And we'll play one of my favorite games, Bad Dad or Badass Dad. Okay, so what I'm gonna have you guys do is vote through chat whether you think I was a bad dad or a badass dad. Okay, badass meaning this is a good, smart move. Okay, so when Evie was younger, we were working with her to try to get her to say please and thank you. Okay, especially working with her to say please. She's done a great job of that now. But one of the things that I did, okay, was I started messing around with her when we got a new TV. And basically what I did is I hooked it up to my phone so I could control the TV with my phone. And so what she would do is she would come in and she'd want to watch a TV show. And so I said, well, Evie, you can tell the TV what you want it to do. And she thought this was really cool. And this is actually before we bought an Alexa, where now she really can do this. And so Evie says to the TV, she says, open up Netflix. And I didn't open up Netflix for her in the other room using my phone because she didn't say please. So what I did is I said, well, Evie, maybe you need to say please, and then the TV will work. It'll open Netflix. So she said, Netflix, open up, please. And sure enough, when she said please, I then, made the computer work, or made the TV work. Okay. She then needed to go to her TV show. So she then said, play Doc McStuffins. Now, because she didn't say please, I didn't go to that show. I said, well, Evie, why don't you try asking again? Okay. So of course, being a 4-year-old at this time, she yells at it, TV, turn on Doc McStuffins. I said, okay, well, maybe you need to ask nicer. Maybe say please. So she says, TV, will you please turn on Doc McStuffins? Okay? And at that point, I rewarded her behavior. Okay, so you guys can vote real quick here. Was that a badass dad move, meaning that kind of reinforcing your behavior in kind of fun way, or was I just bad? All right, so I like the votes, I like the responses. And what would you say that behavior was? So was I using positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement? Okay, so see lots of positive, also seeing a few negatives. If you're saying positive, explain why, either kind of jumping in with voice or through chat. Why is it a positive reinforcement?
I said positive because by her saying please, she's getting rewarded by the TV working.
Okay.
But when she doesn't say please, nothing happens.
Okay, so I think you make the argument as positive because by saying please, she's then getting the TV show. Okay, I'm adding something desirable for her saying please. I'm adding that TV show. Okay? Could you make a case that there was also negative reinforcement as well? So I think if you process it a bit more, I see you guys making some comments, you might say, well, it also works in the fact that I'm ending something unpleasant, which is her waiting to get to the TV show. So you might say it's also negative reinforcement. Okay, so I'm reinforcing her behavior, saying please, by ending the unpleasantness of waiting for her to actually then get to watch the show, something she wanted to do. Okay, so again, when I give you guys examples on the exam, I'll make sure it's a little more clear cut one way or another, but in this case, I want to kind of practice with you a little bit more. Right? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about another aspect of operant conditioning, which is punishment. So then after this, I'll give another example and I'll pause to clarify anything to make sure that we're set. Okay? So punishment has having the opposite effect of reinforcement. The idea here is that these consequences make the target behavior less likely to occur in the future. Okay, so previously we're trying to make a behavior more likely to happen by reinforcing it. Now we're doing is we're saying we're doing the opposite, where we're trying to make the behavior less likely to occur. We don't want it to continue on. And so when we think about this punishment, okay, we can think about behaviors that we don't want. So we're going to punish criminals because we don't want them to steal. Okay? You may punish your child because they come home late. They might disobey curfew. You don't want that to happen again. And just like with reinforcement, there's positive and negative aspects. Okay? So positive punishment is adding something unpleasant or aversive. So if a child shows up late, they get past curfew, you might punish them by giving them more chores to do the next day. Okay, so you're adding something that's unpleasant or aversive. Okay? If a child's not doing well in a class, you might give them more work to do. Okay, so you're punishing them, you're trying to get them to change their behavior to work harder, to do better in the class by giving them more responsibilities. Because you're adding something unpleasant or aversive. Okay? Someone cuts you off. Okay? You want to punish them for their bad driving behavior. So you're going to honk the horn at them. You're going to add something unpleasant. With negative punishment, in this case, you're going to take away something that's pleasant or desired. Okay, so you might take away no TV time, so taking it away. In this case here, that minus, that is that negative. It's taking away something. Okay, so I'll read it for you again. Negative punishment is the case you're going to take away something desirable or something pleasant in order to make that behavior go away. Okay, so going to our example, showing up late, getting home past curfew. You might take away the child's car keys. Okay, so the child no longer has that ability to do something pleasant, drive around. As punishment, trying to make the behavior of showing up past curfew go away. If a child's not focusing on their studies, you might use negative punishment by taking away their cell phone. Okay? You're taking away something that's desired, something that they want to have, in order to punish the behavior of not studying, not being prepared. Now, I'm going to ask you guys for examples here in just a minute. But one of the things I think is really important to make sure that it was really, really clear is that positive does not mean good or desirable, and negative does not mean bad or undesirable. In this case, when we're talking about operant conditioning, positive means adding something, and negative means removing something. Okay, so you guys will note I very rarely ever write anything in red, almost never write everything in all caps. Here we've got things that are underlined and bolded. So this is a really important piece to make sure that you understand when we use this type of terminology, that positive does not mean good or desirable, and negative doesn't mean something's bad or undesirable. It simply means that when something's positive, such as positive punishment, you're adding something. And when something's negative, means that you're removing something. Okay? So you have to keep that addition and that subtraction, that negative, that removal, in the context of either whether it's a reward or punishment. So let me pause at this point and have you guys generate some examples of positive punishment and negative punishment. So just like you did before in chat, indicate which type of punishment it is, and then give me your example. We'll kind of run through at least a few of these, kind of give you a sense of which ones are working well. All right, great examples. Let's get a few more. Okay, so let's process some of these examples. You guys did a very nice job. Some of you kind of talked about getting a speeding ticket, and we do want to talk about that as a form of positive punishment. Okay, so you're punishing the person for going over the speed limit. It's a behavior you don't want them to do, and it's positive because you're adding something. In this case, you're adding the ticket, you're adding the fine, the court things with it. Okay? A timeout is a great example of negative punishment. So a child can't behave themselves, doing things they're not supposed to. In this case, what you're doing is you're taking away something pleasant or desired, the ability to play and do things, by putting the child into timeout. Okay, so that's a great example. Spraying the cat with water, also a great example of positive punishment. Trying to get the cat to stop doing something, okay, maybe scratching at something, by adding something unpleasant. Okay, so we see our speeding ticket example of positive punishment. Okay. If you're ignoring someone because they're not behaving well, okay, maybe you're giving them the cold shoulder, we might say that's an example of negative punishment. So you're taking away something pleasant or desired, that social interaction with the other person, okay, because you're trying to get them to stop doing a particular behavior. Okay? So we'll give you kind of one example working through this. Okay, just like we had bad dad or badass dad, here's our story, here's our next game, okay, of bad brother or badass brother. Okay, so when I was younger, I have a brother who's 7 years younger than me, and when I was younger, we'd always make a point of trying to hold the door open for my mom and dad when they were walking through. And I remember from different times that my brother Matt would stop or would fail to open up the door, so I'd punch him in the shoulder. So I punch him in the shoulder to try to remind him that he needed to open the door for mom. Okay? Is that positive punishment or negative punishment? Okay, so go ahead through chat, indicate whether you think it's positive punishment or negative punishment, and you can also indicate if you'd like whether I was a bad brother for hitting him or a badass brother because I was trying to make him more aware of being helpful. All right, so we'll chime in. You guys have the right idea with saying is positive punishment. Okay, so specifically saying is positive punishment because I added that shoulder pain. Okay, so I added something unpleasant or aversive. Okay? In terms of the bad brother or badass brother, that's jury's still out on that one. I definitely didn't hit him that hard, but I will say that he's much better about holding the doors open even now as an adult. So maybe it worked out, but maybe it was a little bit of a questionable practice. I think I'd maybe parent a little bit better than I brothered at that point, but we'll kind of decide on things. So when we pull things all together, I'll just kind of have this on the screen for you guys to see. We won't go through this table all together because we've kind of been practicing it separately, but you can see how when we compare positive and negative along with reinforcement versus punishment, you kind of see all these different combinations, what it does in terms of producing the output. So this is a good table for you guys to kind of be observing, to be paying attention to kind of practice with on your own. Okay, to make sure that you're understanding positive, negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment. Again, I'll have some things for you on Carmen to also help out with this as well. But let me pause at this point to see what questions you have, things I can help you with. Again, I don't get as much feedback with using this method of teaching, so definitely let me know where things are confusing, things I can go back to. Before we'll do is we'll get into talking a little bit about the reinforcement schedule. So I'll pause at this point, pick up any questions you guys have. If you're feeling good, just let me know as well. All right, so it seems like we're good. Again, practice with these, come up with examples. You can connect with others to kind of practice, go back and forth. I think that's kind of really the best way to learn these this type of terminology. So part of what this also gets into, as we talked about with Skinner, is that not only are we talking about reinforcement and punishment, we have to start asking the question, how often should we reinforce? So the idea here is if we want a behavior to happen more often by giving positive consequences for it, okay, what do we need to do in terms of reinforcing that behavior? Okay, do I reward it every single time, or is that even the best? Okay, so what do I do? Do I reward it every time Evie says please? Okay, so she always gets a cookie. Maybe she'd like that the most. But what about over time? I don't want to keep giving her a cookie when she's 16 years old, right? So what Skinner raises the question of is thinking about kind of our schedule of reinforcement and what works best to establish a basic behavior we want and maintain a particular behavior. Okay, so the argument here, the thinking here is that we may do things differently when we're trying to get a behavior to begin occurring, such as saying please, and when we want to maintain that behavior. We want the child to keep saying please. And he argued that continuous reinforcement, or giving a reward after the target every single time, is the best reinforcement schedule for making sure that that person, the subject, acquires the desired behavior quickly. So the idea here is that if I want Evie to say please, I should reinforce her every time that she does that when we initially start. Okay, so the idea here is that she'll keep making that connection between saying please, the behavior, and that positive reward resulting. Okay, you could also think about this in terms of, every time she cleans up her room or picks up some toys, I give her a reinforcement all the time. Now, what Skinner suggests is that over time, though, we might use partial or intermittent reinforcement, okay, giving rewards part of the time, that the target behavior takes longer to be acquired, but persists longer without reward. Okay, so we have to kind of make a decision here. Do I want to reinforce things all the time, which means that behavior gets acquired quickly, but if I stop reinforcing it, it's going to extinguish quickly because there's no longer a reward for it? Or do I start off with kind of this partial intermittent reinforcement? So I give rewards some of the time. Okay, so I might give her a cookie, every once in a while for saying please. Well, he argues that this means that the target behavior takes longer to occur, to start to happen, but it might persist longer, okay, without having that reward because you don't know when that reward's going to happen. Okay, so if we don't know where we get the reward, it means we're going to keep trying that behavior, and then when we get the reward, it kind of keeps us going. We see this with gambling behavior. Okay, so when individuals gamble, they don't win all the time, okay, but they do win enough that that behavior at different random points gets rewarded. Okay, so putting in the money and pulling the slot, or at least that's what you used to do. Now, what Skinner talks about with partial and intermittent reinforcement is one that can be kind of broken down in several different ways. And this is, so again, where we're going to get into some terminology. I want to spend a little bit of time with this because our last kind of big piece I want to make sure that we cover well. So we may schedule our reinforcement based on an interval of time that has gone by. So this is one of the things that you had on your quiz, was talking about examples of this. So what we can do is we can set up two types of interval schedules: a fixed interval schedule and a variable interval schedule. Okay, so a fixed interval schedule means that you get a reinforcement every so often. Okay, so if you have a punch card, I used to go to a coffee shop in Jacksonville all the time. Every time I bought 10 apple juices, I was not a coffee drinker, or every time I bought 9 apple juices, I got the 10th one free. Okay, eventually they started giving me those instead of coffee because I was there enough. Okay. Every 2 weeks you get paid. Okay. Every year, if you file your taxes, you then potentially get a tax refund. Okay. So this basically means that after a certain amount of time, has gone by, so every 2 weeks, you then get a reward. Okay. For our variable interval schedule, means that after an unpredictable amount of time, okay, you're then going to receive some type of reinforcement. Okay, so it might be that, after a certain amount of time, you get paid. Okay? After a certain amount of time goes by, something you might get a bonus. Okay? You don't really know when that's going to happen. It might happen anytime. So it's unpredictable as to when you're going to get this. Okay? So variable interval schedule, after a certain amount of time goes by, your professor gives you extra credit for something. Okay? Now, to help contrast this a little bit, we can talk about this in terms of a ratio. Okay, so I apologize. Actually, one of my examples fits better with the ratio. Okay? So we may plan for a certain ratio of rewards per number of instances to get a desired behavior. Okay, so in this, again, we can have a fixed versus variable ratio. So a fixed ratio is after every so many behaviors. So I apologize. When we talk about punch cards and things like that, that's actually an example of a fixed ratio schedule. Okay, so after every so many behaviors, after every so many purchases, you then get reinforced for your purchases by getting something free. For a variable ratio schedule, okay, this means after an unpredictable number of behaviors, then you get some type of reward. Okay, so it might be after some unpredictable number of sales that you make, you then get a bonus. Okay, so it is tied to your behavior. Okay? It is tied to kind of this ratio, but we don't kind of know what that is. Okay, so again, we can think about this as both at an interval versus a ratio breakdown, so over time versus number of behaviors. And we can think about whether it's fixed, meaning it happens after ever so many times, so after certain amount of time, after a certain number of behaviors, or we can think of this as variable, where it kind of happens unpredictably. Okay, so we had kind of reinforcing you guys studying by having you take quizzes at different time points. Okay, so it happened kind of variable in terms of you never were quite sure when that quiz was going to happen. Okay, versus a ratio schedule would be after an unpredictable number of behaviors that you're doing. Okay. Now, where this comes back to is kind of our beginning point here, okay, is that we can think about, well, these are some examples for you guys to look at, but we can think about this reinforcement schedule. We might say that, again, at a higher rate of responding, okay, we get a fixed ratio. Okay, you might see that that gets picked up faster. Okay, but for a variable ratio, high consistent responding, even if reinforcement stops, it goes away, it might still get that person to keep trying things. Okay, so a lot of times you're going to think about this kind of ratio, these intervals, depending upon the behavior that you want the person to continue doing. Okay. So again, with both talking about positive and negative punishment and reinforcement, and these different schedules of reinforcement, make sure that you spend some time with this terminology. And again, there'll be examples of this on Carmen for both pieces, both the conditioning and this type of reinforcement schedules. So make sure that you're spending time looking at that. Okay? Let me pause at this point to see what questions you guys have, things that you want me to go back through to make sure that we're set on things before we'll sign off for today. And if you're good, let me know. If you have questions, hit me up either through chat or you can go ahead and just kind of voice them. All right, so I know we went through a lot of kind of technical things today. We had technical problems as well, so I appreciate you guys hanging in there. Make sure that you're practicing with these things. Again, by this time tomorrow, I'll have released the exam. You have 24 hours of the exam being available before it's going to be due on Thursday by 12:30. It'll be available either through email to answer questions or during class time. I will re-record that piece that got garbled up. I'll have that up on YouTube along with this as well. So please, good luck on the exam. Let me know if you have questions or run-ins or problems. Again, I appreciate you guys hanging in with this. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And I won't see you Thursday necessarily because there's not class, but class will resume again next Tuesday. Okay. So otherwise, good luck on the exam. I hope things are going well for you guys. I'll see you later.